Every day, the news brings more and more images of random violence, torture, and sexual aggression right into our living rooms. Violence and violent images permeate more and more aspects of our lives. And I think it's time to draw the line.
Thanks, Joe. I'm Ronnie Ersenbach, and this is the Band Media Podcast, where we will be talking about the art that crossed that line. Charlton Heston left us with a great many memorable quotes to remember him by. Some were lines from classic films he starred in, like, "Take your stinking paws off me, you damn dirty ape." Some were from his own noggin, most notably the infamous "From My Cold Dead Hands" at the 2000 National Rifle Association Convention. But I think my favorite of all of them was a combination of the two. And I quote, and you'll have to do your best to imagine this in that classic Heston voice, quote, "I got my brain on hype. Tonight will be your night. Die, 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 pig, die. Fuck the police. I know your family's grieving. Fuck 'em. Catchy little number, isn't it?" End quote. The catchy little number that he was reciting was the song Cop Killer, and the subject of this week's episode. Now, here's the weird thing about the song Cop Killer. Like many pieces of art that spurn moral backlash, its infamy became larger than the song itself. This leads to kind of a weird game of telephone as time passes that leaves the details a little distorted at the end. So here is one common understanding of the various hoopla surrounding the song Cop Killer. Cop Killer was a rap song by Ice-T that he was inspired to write after the Rodney King riots. The song's vicious lyrics about murdering police officers would go on to stoke the rage of police organizations and the right wing throughout the nation. Now, while some of this is true, the devil's in the details, and a lot of these details have fallen victim to a sort of unintended revisionism over the years. It becomes like one of those quotes everybody knows but never actually showed up in the source material, like "Beam me up, Scotty," having never been said in the original Star Trek. Fun fact, James Doohan, the actor who played Scotty, would go on to title his autobiography, "Beam Me Up, Scotty," after the misquote. So I'll let you know what that previous statement gets wrong, but I think first it would be a good time for this week's trigger warnings. We will be talking about artistic depictions of sex and violence, but notably not sexual violence, and we will be talking about actual violence, racial tensions, and police brutality. So here's a rundown of what my previous description of Cop Killer got wrong. Cop Killer was not a rap song. Rather, it was fairly obviously a metal song. Some might say trash metal or crossover metal, but I personally hate the subgenre game, so I'm just going to leave it at metal. Also, the song was not by Ice-T, but by the band Body Count, which Ice-T fronted along with guitar player Ernie C. Also, the song was written before the Rodney King beating and ensuing riots. All the stuff about angering police organizations and the right wing, though, that rings true. With one notable exception, which was an organization known as the National Black Police Association, or the NBPA. But before we dive too deep on the song itself, let's start at the beginning, with the OG original gangster, Tracy Loren Marrow. And for the record, it's Loren, not Lauren, but should I ever have the pleasure of meeting him in person, I think I'll just stick to Ice-T. Ice-T was born in Newark, New Jersey, to mother Alice Marrow and father Solomon Marrow. Sadly, Alice would pass away of a heart attack when Ice-T was only in the 3rd grade. Tragedy would strike again only 4 years later when Ice-T's father would also pass away from a heart attack. Left with no living parents, Ice-T would end up moving in with his aunt on his father's side all the way out in South Los Angeles. It was there that he would room with his cousin Earl, who Ice-T claimed was so into Jimi Hendrix that he thought he was Jimi Hendrix. And Ice-T would pick up an appreciation of rock and metal from him. It was while attending Crenshaw High School in Los Angeles that Ice-T would meet and befriend Ernie Cunningham, better known as Ernie C. And to paraphrase the never-ending story, Ice-T had many other amazing adventures, including becoming gang-affiliated, turning to a life of crime before joining the military to help provide for his new daughter, falling in love with hip-hop while deployed and coming home to become a full-blown rap icon, before he would finally return to this episode. But that's another story. Ernie C. was born and raised in Compton, California. He was one of the only kids in his school that was into rock music. He credits his uncle for having fostered that love in him by exposing him to all kinds of artists and styles within the rock genre. He would save up his money and buy himself his first guitar at the age of 12. From there, he taught himself how to play. It was a skill that would gain him some notoriety amongst his fellow students at school, including members of the infamous Crips. Besides teaching himself, he would also teach Dennis Miles, aka D-Rock the Executioner, who would also end up joining Body Count. Fun fact, D-Rock the Executioner would go on to call his guitar style ghetto metal. Sadly, he passed away of lymphoma in 2004. Drummer Beatmaster V and bassist Mooseman would fill out the rest of the Body Count original lineup, both of which also attended Crenshaw High School. As Ice-T's solo career began to take off, he would often pull Ernie C into the studio to lay down tracks. But as Ernie C would point out, there was only so much metal guitar he could throw down on a rap track before it started to become a metal track. Years later, on Body Count's cover of the song Raining in Blood by Slayer, aptly titled Raining in Blood Postmortem 2017, Ice-T would say this about the formation of the band, quote, "Body Count is a band I put together just to let one of my best friends, Ernie C., play his guitar. He's always been playing guitar. We all went to Crenshaw High School together in South Central Los Angeles. And I had the idea, let's make a metal band. Let's make a rock band because I had been to Europe and I had noticed the kids would mosh off of hip-hop. So we put the band together and I used the 3 bands that were my favorites at the time to set the tone. We used the impending doom of a group like Black Sabbath, who pretty much invented metal, the punk sensibility of somebody like Suicidal, who basically put that gangbanger style from Venice, California into the game, and the speed and precision of Slayer, one of my favorite groups and will always be." End quote. Fun fact, Suicidal Tendencies, the group that Ice-T was referring to when he says suicidal, had a huge hit with their song Institutionalized that Body Count would later lyrically revamp with their cover of Institutionalized 2014. Double fun fact, all he wanted was a Pepsi and you wouldn't give it to him. Body Count would make their official debut at Lollapalooza in 1991. Ice-T spent the first half of his performance performing his solo hip-hop act that he had now become famous for. He pulled out the band for the second half of the performance, introducing Body Count to the world. There are many that considered these performances the highlight of the festival. Body Count would make its official recording debut later that same year on a track on Ice-T's iconic solo album, OG Original Gangster. The track, aptly titled Body Count, starts off with a spoken word bit in which Ice-T states, quote, "You see, a lot of people don't realize that, rock and roll is truly black music. It was created by Chuck Berry, Little Richard, and black people like that, who started off back in the day, And as far as I'm concerned, music is music. I don't look at it as rock and roll or R&B, all that kind of stuff. I just look at it as music, And anybody who said I've sold out, they can basically suck my dick because I really don't give a fuck about that shit, But I do what I like. I happen to like rock and roll, and I feel sorry for anybody who listens to one form of music, Right now, I got my own rock band. It's about to jump off, and it's really black hardcore band called Body Count. And on some of the records, I'm laying some vocals on it. And I got a tape of it right here. Yo, check it out." End quote. And with that, Ice-T, Ernie C., and the rest of Body Count would march unfalteringly into metal music with an unapologetically black and specifically South Central point of view. If there were any that were left with doubt about that, they needed only to listen to the first lines of the track Body Count. Quote, "Sometimes I sit at home, and I watch TV, and I wonder what it would be like to live in some place like, The Cosby Show, Ozzie and Harriet, where cops come and got your cat out of the tree. All your friends died of old age. But you see, I live in South Central Los Angeles, and unfortunately, shit ain't like that. It's real fucked up." End quote. Body Count would release its self-titled debut album on March 10th, 1992 on Sire Records. As part of the promotion, the CD was shipped to radio station in tiny little body bags, which is both awesome and kind of adorable. Despite the fact that There Goes the Neighborhood was actually the first single, it was actually the 18th and final track on the album, Cop Killer, that would ultimately come up against public backlash. But not immediately. When the album was initially released, it did okay, finding sort of a cult following amongst some of the heavy metal crowd. But it wasn't until the following month of April 1992 the song would truly come under scrutiny. A little background, I'm sure we all know, but just in case, let's set the scene. The previous year, on March 3rd of 1991, a black man by the name of Rodney King was pulled over after a police pursuit for speeding. After he was ordered out of his car, he was brutally beaten by 4 Los Angeles Police Department officers that were part of a larger group of 15 that had pulled him over. Though accusations against the LAPD for police brutality, especially towards minorities, were nothing new, this time it was caught on tape by a man named George Holliday, who had filmed the incident from a nearby balcony. He then proceeded to send the tape to the media, and the footage was viewed all over the world. The 4 officers would stand trial for assault, and all 4 were acquitted on April 29, 1992. The infamous LA riots would start just hours after the announcement of the verdict, in which 63 people would tragically lose their lives, close to 2,400 would be injured, and over $1 billion in damage would be done. It should be noted that this is a very, very Cliff's Notes account of both the Rodney King beating and the LA riots. As the riots raged, some groups amongst the police and media began to pick up on the song Cop Killer and painting it as an anthem of sorts of the riots, and even going so far as to blame it for inciting the riots. Amongst the first was an organization known as CLEAT, or Combined Law Enforcement Association of Texas. They called not only for a boycott against the album, not only for a boycott against the record label, but on the media giant who owned the record label, none other than Time Warner, until all copies were pulled from the stores. Many other police organizations from across the country followed suit, specifically setting their eyes on a boycott of the Warner Brothers' upcoming blockbuster Batman Returns. Criticism even started to come from as high up as then President of the United States, George H.W. Bush, and his Vice President, Dan Quayle, who had a particular bone to pick with Ice-T, saying, quote, "This latest rap singer, Ice-T, and his record Cop Killer, and making money off a record that says it's okay to kill cops, I find it outrageous," end quote. And also branded the album as obscene. Take note of the fact that Ice-T is referred to as a rap singer for his metal album. There'll be more on that later. Tipper, certainly not the last time her name will come up on this podcast, Gore, also had some words she expressed in an article she wrote for the Washington Post. Amongst them being, quote, "Cultural economics were a poor excuse for the South's continuation of slavery. Ice-T's financial success cannot excuse the vileness of his message," end quote. Fun fact, if you're a white person using slavery to vilify a black person, how about just don't? Yeah, don't do that. And finally, as if that wasn't enough, none other than Moses himself, actor Charlton Heston, decided to get in on the action. As a minor stockholder in Time Warner, he very publicly went to a Time Warner shareholders meeting and read the lyrics to the song out loud and voiced his disdain for the record. Side note, if you have not seen Charlton Heston reading the lyrics to Cop Killer, it may be one of my favorite clips of all time on the internet. The link will be in the show notes. With that, pressure was on Time Warner. Not only were boycotts threatened, but there was picketing and protests outside of their offices. Death threats even started to come in. To their credit, Time Warner stood by the album. Ice-T was not silent through this whole ordeal. He spoke up in defense of the song and the album on many occasions, and in many different interviews. He even told reporters, quote, "I'm singing in the first person as a character who is fed up with police brutality. I ain't never killed no cop. I felt like it a lot of times, but I never did it. If you believe that I'm a cop killer, you believe that David Bowie is an astronaut." Now, I don't want to get it twisted. The song Cop Killer is particularly harsh. In fact, the whole album is. The song starts out by saying, quote, "This next record is dedicated to some personal friends of mine. the LAPD, for every cop that has ever taken advantage of somebody, beat them down or hurt them because they got long hair, listened to the wrong kind of music, wrong color, whatever they thought the reason to do it. For every one of those fucking police, I'd like to take a pig out here in this parking lot and shoot him in the motherfucking face." End quote. Later, after chanting "fuck the police," he goes on to chant "cop killer" and asks, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" The answer echoed back, "A cop killer." Now, for as damning as that may sound on the surface, some of the other songs on the album included "Voodoo," a song about Ice-T meeting an old lady with a voodoo doll of him that uses it to systematically destroy parts of his body, including his eye and cutting off all his fingers. Another song about male promiscuity called "Evil Dick," about a man being literally possessed by his penis. "KKK Bitch," in which he falls in love with the daughter of the Grand Wizard of the KKK, and then him and the rest of Body Count infiltrate a Klan meeting by wearing hoods, and then have an orgy with the girls after it's all over. And then there's "Mama's Gotta Die Tonight," a song about Ice-T finding out his mother is racist after she slaps him for bringing home a white girl. He then proceeds to light her on fire, beat her with a baseball bat, and chop her body into pieces before mailing those pieces all over the US. There were also less violent tracks, like "The Winner Loses," a song about the perils of crack cocaine addiction. Fun fact, Ice-T himself doesn't drink, smoke, and has never done drugs. But we see this repeatedly across the album. Body Count explores heavy themes like racism and police brutality with visceral and often violent imagery mixed with a very dark sense of humor. So why is it that David Bowie is allowed the artistic license to be an astronaut, and Ice-T must actually be a cop/mother killer with one eye, no fingers, and a possessed penis? Some have pointed to race playing a role in this. Now, I took extensive notes in my research on this, so let me pull them up right quick. It just says duh. Maybe Fab Five Freddy, groundbreaking hip-hop artist and the first host of Yo MTV Raps, can say it better. Quote, "You know, it's inherently racist because you have motion pictures with huge stars, white stars that kill and shoot and maim dozens of people. Bruce Willis, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Mel Gibson, go down the list, with sound as well as picture. And with just a sound from records, they want to turn this thing into, the same corporation, Time Warner, who have had bad guys killing cops and doing this and saying whatever. But when it's the voice of young, black, angry youth, it becomes this whole nightmare." End quote. Also, you'll remember Dan Quayle referring to Ice-T as a rap singer earlier when discussing his very metal album. Well, he was far from the only one. Media and politicians began to almost universally use Cop Killer as a dangerous example of rap music. According to Ice-T, quote, "The fact that Cop Killer was a rock record and that they used it as a rap, they called it a rap record, was definitely a way they were able to rally people behind it. Because if you say a rock record came out called Cop Killer, a lot of white people with power would say, well, I like Aerosmith. I like Fleetwood Mac. Maybe I like this. But you say rap, and that means N-words, and I don't like it." End quote. It should be noted for the sake of accuracy, I said the words N-word, and Ice-T said the actual word, which I will not be saying. The irony is that the first single, "There Goes the Neighborhood," was told from the first-person point of view of a racist metalhead, upset that some black dudes were rolling up and playing rock music, and what's worse, playing it better than them. In essence, satirically making the statement that this music isn't for you, but we are now watching the actual message being played out on a national stage. Now, Cop Killer wasn't without its defenders, most of which did so in the name of free speech, which is a just cause to be sure, but Ice-T himself claimed that it was missing the point. His far more preferred defense of the song was closer to the line the National Black Police Association took when they said, quote, "Many individuals of law enforcement profession do not want anyone to scrutinize their actions, but want to scrutinize the actions of others," end quote, and then called for independent and citizen review boards for police officers. The controversy went international when in July of 1992, the New Zealand Police Commissioner tried to get Body Count banned from playing a show in Auckland by taking them and Warner Brothers Records to the Indecent Publications Tribunal, which at the time was New Zealand's government censorship organization. It was the first time in 20 years that a sound recording had been brought before the tribunal, and the first time ever to hear a case involving popular music. They ended up finding that Body Count was not indecent, saying the album displayed, quote, an honest purpose, end quote, and the show was not canceled. In the weeks following the controversy, I'm sure to the surprise of none of you fine listeners, the sales of the album tripled. Batman Returns earned $45.69 million in 2,644 theaters on its opening weekend. This was the highest opening weekend in 1992 and the highest opening weekend of any film up to that point. That's why it came as a bit of a shock when the news broke that Ice-T had made the decision on his own to pull the song from stores. He cited many reasons over the years, including being brought up on sedition charges, which the punishment is death, the fact that he didn't want people to think the song was written solely to stir up controversy so he could profit financially, and that with death threats coming into Time Warner and its employees, he felt they shouldn't have to take the heat for his song. So he stopped shipping the album with Cop Killer and replaced it with a new version with slightly updated album art and a new song called Freedom of Speech, featuring Jello Biafra, the original singer of the Dead Kennedys. It wasn't the end of Cop Killer, though. Though it was no longer available for sale, Body Count started to give it away as a single at their concerts. Ice-T left Time Warner for his own independent record company, Rhyme Syndicate, and took Body Count with him. Body Count has continued to release records and tour sporadically throughout the years. Sadly, Ice-T and Ernie C are the only two original members left standing. As mentioned before, D-Rock the Executioner died of lymphoma in 2004 at the age of 44. Drummer Beatmaster V died of leukemia in 1996 at the age of 37. And bass player Mooseman was killed in a drive-by shooting for which he was not the intended target in 2001 at the age of 38. The band now consists of Ice-T and Ernie C, of course, and bassist Vincent Price, drummer Ill Will, and guitarist Juan of the Dead. Besides continuing to produce music both for his solo work and with Body Count, Ice-T has added acting to his resume, most famously taking on the role of Detective Finn on Law & Order Special Victims Unit since the year 2000. Fun fact, this was not the first time Ice-T played a cop. He also did so in 1991's New Jack City. And let us not forget, he is an Army vet in real life. Also, if you're around my age, you may remember trying to make out a scrambled booby or two on the 1995 pay-per-view special, Ice-T's Extreme Babes, notable for being the title of something in the 90s that actually spelled the word extreme with an E. He's also done some directing, including the phenomenal documentary Something from Nothing, The Art of Rap, which if you haven't watched, I highly recommend. Like I said at the top of this episode, the hype and the controversy around this album had a nasty habit of overshadowing it through the years, which is a real shame. Musically, it enjoys that very slim space that appeals to punkers just as much as metalheads, and is usually reserved for a band like Motorhead or Gwar. Lyrically, it brought a point of view to both scenes that was so fresh and severely underrepresented. It really is a damn good album. And if Mr. Charlton Heston wants to take my copy away from me, well, he'll have to pry it from my cold dead hands. You know, if his weren't already so cold and dead. Okay, before I sign off, I think we need to address the elephant in the room. Look, I try to keep these episodes as evergreen as possible and keep to historic events as opposed to current ones, but I think it would be irresponsible of me to release this particular episode and not acknowledge the fervor that the world has rightfully been thrown into over the murder of George Floyd. Truth be told, I picked this episode to produce before the incident happened, but it feels wrong to not say something. Now, there's a world of political and moral arguments to be made about what's going on right now, but to be frank, that's really outside of what we do on this show. But being as this show is about history, at least that's what I consider it, I do think I can say this. People of color in America have had a rightful grievance about police brutality since the police have existence. They have been asking for a redress of this grievance for just as long. The George Floyd protests weren't the first. Ice-T and Body Count or the Rodney King riots weren't the first. Even Martin Luther King wasn't the first. When in his famous I Have a Dream speech in 1963, he said, quote, "We can never be satisfied as the Negro is the victim of the unspeakable horrors of police brutality," end quote. The voice of dissent has been there for hundreds of years. Hundreds. In their music, art, films, literature, and yes, even sometimes being yelled loudly in the street. It's past time that we collectively as a nation and a planet stopped and listened. Because fun fact, Black Lives Matter. And with that, I will bid you adieu, but final fun fact, I'll miss you folks. Thanks for listening. I'll catch you next time. Oh, there goes that music again. Follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Band Media Podcast. Email us at bandmediapodcast@gmail.com. You can follow me on Twitter at Ronnie Ursenbach. And please like, comment, subscribe. And if you donate blood, come join our Band Media Podcast team on the Red Cross app. And if you don't donate blood, then think about starting and then do the thing I just said. Well, that's enough of my rambling for now, but keep being wonderful, dear listeners. Adios.